So the developer of Fear and Hunger is pretty active on the Discord, where he goes by Orange. He talks about a lot of stuff in there, like fan content and lore, but importantly for us, he discusses upcoming content. Short and long term, really long term. Although he's very careful not to spoil anything. He's been talking about a lot, and I've mentioned a few things, and there's a lot that people haven't seen. So I thought I'd do a video to cover sort of all the important stuff he's mentioned over the past month or so. So to begin with, just talking about the upcoming update, and it's set in some sort of fishing village, and so you can see the little fish man there. What's he called again? He's Swollen. He's the Swollen, and he's got his own little pitchfork and everything. Somebody asked him, what's the estimated date for when the update's going to come out? And he said, me and estimated dates don't mix it together well. Termina was 1 to 2 years later than his actual estimates. He announced it a lot sooner than he realized he needed time for. So, but importantly here, he talks a little bit about the assets that he made in here. So it's pretty heavy on new assets. So it's more than just the fishing village. He wants to make a few new enemies plus lots of writing. We're going to get multiple enemies. It's not just the Swollen. It's not just one new area. The fishing village is going to be a pretty major part because it's going to link the first part of the game, the slums and the old town, to the second part of the game. So it's most likely going to link the docks, where you find Dan for the first time, to the stairs next to the church. That's most likely where it's going to be, because Orange has said in the past that he wants another link between the early game and the mid game, just to add a bit more variety to a start of a playthrough. And there's more talk about the different assets that are coming. He's making climbable rock surfaces to be used in different places. And he says, update bloat is real. I set out to make a few new areas that were meant to be pretty brief, but this is turning out to be a whole new cave/tunnel system underneath some areas. So it looks like we're getting another alternate way to travel between some areas, kind of like the sewers. How exactly this is going to pan out, who knows? But we've at least got 2 brand new areas, right? A whole bunch more caves and the new fishing area, plus a whole bunch of new enemies, whatever they're going to be. And here's just a bit of a close-up of the thing. So you can see that these cave walls are from the museum tile set, where you climb down at the end of the museum to get to the white bunker. And you can see he's added the actual climbable wall marks here, but it's probably going to be a little bit different from this. He says he's still changing it. So one thing I want to say is take everything here with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it's still, Miro's still working on it. He could change his mind. He could find out, he could come up with a better idea. He could realize the idea kind of sucks. He could add a lot more content than what he said. It's all up in the air. So don't take this for gospel, right? I got a few things planned for updates, and some questions here will get fleshed out a bit. I know some things are just a little bit too vague as of now. Don't expect everything to get spelled out, but at least some hints will be coming. I think it's pretty interesting stuff. I think part of the problem is that I've had a rough idea for a trilogy of games that, since the last stretches of Fear and Hunger 1, Termina suffers a little bit from being the middle child. I want these games to work and stand alone as much as possible, so I think some things require a bit more answering. And then Rain asks, would the third game be set in more modern times, or perhaps sci-fi horror? Might sound a bit weird considering I've got an overarching story in mind, but the setting has a lot of freedom. It could take place in many places in the Fear and Hunger timeline. And then Orange clarifies on what he meant by middle child. I guess I used the term middle child here wrong. Doesn't mean that in the typical way where middle child achieves the least, or however that term is usually used. I only meant some aspects of Termina's story remain in darkness because I'd like to flesh out the stuff in other games. It might be a bit awkward if I'd want the game to work as a standalone too. And somebody asks, you're like the remaining 3 old/ascended gods? And he's like, no comments. So what this means is that there's some stuff, some parts of the lore that are important to Termina, the game itself, that will likely not affect other games as much. Like the festival. Is the festival going to show up in Fear and Hunger 3? Probably not. So if there's stuff that he thinks isn't clear about it, then he's likely going to explain a bit more of it. Or maybe stuff like Venushka and Venushka's story, because Venushka is a god introduced in this game and a god that, spoilers, is dead. So some more answers about what Venushka is doing, or perhaps what the Sulfur Cult, how they've infiltrated Preheval. So there's a lot of questions in the lore that, could use a bit more answering. And this is sort of what he's talking about. And this one's specifically about upcoming content. So somebody asked, is it true that Tanaka and Pav are going to be recruitable in the next update? And Orange says, no, not true. No new characters in the next update yet. This was March 14th, so this is 2 weeks ago exactly. It's not likely those plans have changed because Miro has said that new characters take a lot of work. You know what? I'll just read it out. Not true. No new characters in the next update yet. They'll most likely be the first ones added to the game, just not the next update. So Tanaka and Pav are most likely the first characters to be added, but almost certainly not in the next update. Somebody asked about firefighters. Like, how come there's no firefighters in Pre-Heval? And Mira says, well, you know, there's plenty of things missing in the game, but then plenty of streets are also blocked off, so who knows what lies behind those cluttered streets. The city will most likely expand with new buildings, but some game logic will remain for sure. No one thinks Raccoon City of Resident Evil 2 has no office buildings just because you don't visit one in the game. Yeah, so we're not getting Tanaka and Pav yet, but they'll probably be the update after that or the one after that. So they will be soon, but not the next update. And also, there is going to be more content added to the overworld in Pre-Heval, but it won't be literally a whole city, right? So, and this was talking about the long-term future of the series. So somebody said, you know, going to space could lead to a risk of turning into Warhammer in space. And Orange says, not really a big fan of Warhammer, so I doubt there's a risk of that happening. Nothing against it, just not my thing. But yeah, I doubt space will happen anytime soon. My current idea is something that would probably give negative knee-jerk reaction to many who like these games, but we'll see. Everything's still in the air. Somebody asked, was just wondering, is the third game going to be the last in the series, or will there be spin-offs? And Orange says, considering I don't even know what the next game will be for sure, I have no idea. There is a thematic trilogy of sorts I'd like to finish. That doesn't mean the surface story needs to come to an end or whatever. That doesn't mean the world and its lore couldn't continue expanding later in other games / spin-offs. Don't expect end of the world type scenario in other words. And somebody asked, well, surely you'd do something that alludes to the end of the world. And said, no, I don't think so. I find apocalypse plots a bit boring and cliched, to be honest. I'll avoid any end of the world scenario because that would just up the ante way too much. I don't want the scale of events to get bigger. Things get boring fast if a story has to become bigger and bigger each time. I mean, just look at like WoW, right? every X-Pack is another end of the world plot. And it just gets really tiresome after a while, doesn't it? Somebody says, a full-on apocalypse would probably be the lowest hanging fruit possible for 3. I very much like Termina's immediacy. The festival is very much present and a threat for the PC and the other contestants, but insignificance in the grand scheme of things, aside from a specific ending. Nara says, yeah, Fear and Hunger endings tend to just change things. Hasn't been apocalypse after any of the endings, really. Things are just a bit different than how they were before. So this sort of, you know, this is important just to talk about potential Fear and Hunger 3 ideas. So it's not going to be an apocalypse. You know, Miro wants the series to remain open after Fear and Hunger 3, so it's not going to be anything sort of a definitive end. And whenever you hear about Fear and Hunger 3, you might have a bit of a negative knee-jerk reaction to it. And this one's talking about extra endings, because everybody always asks whether more endings are going to come to the game, and Miro says that, yeah, he's got some ideas for endings, but he's not exactly sure what they will be yet. He likes the current set of endings where you either save everybody or get super selfish and everybody else dies except you. And he does think that the 3 ending routes at the moment is a bit too few. There will most likely be new endings coming to the game. It's most likely not the next update, and probably not for a while after that. Personally, I would be surprised if we got new endings before we got all the playable characters done. And playable characters take ages. So, here's something new. Miro posted this without context. Posted this little fella without context. I've got a close up on the next frame. And somebody asked, Mao asked, what is that? My first thought is that it's an alternate sprite for the ghost child in the orphanage. And Orange is like, related? ? More ghost type Pokemon incoming. Miro's really cheeky as well. Sometimes he'll show stuff off and then won't explain what it is, or you know, just be a bit cheeky. This is a blown up version of it. He posted a really low res, but it's basically like this size that he posted, right? It's tiny. My first thought was that it looks like a Daruma doll, right? Like one of these fellas. Or like Ao Oni, right? What do you guys think? He's a strange looking fella, but he might be related to the Po, which is a sort of kind of Japanese style demon. So which would explain the Daruma look, but you know, who knows? Yeah, so this one's just talking a bit about the difficulty modes throughout the games. And this one is important. He says, there is no easy mode in Fear and Hunger 1. The Fear and Hunger difficulty setting, which is the lowest difficulty setting in the game, is just called Fear and Hunger, used to be the standard difficulty for the longest time, and it still is if you ask me. So if anybody tells you that you need to play on Terror and Starvation mode, tell them no. Miro's official stance is that Fear and Hunger difficulty is the correct difficulty. You can tell them to eat it. So anybody who's told me, I'm looking at you, chat, if anybody tells me again that I need to play on Terror and Starvation, you're done. This is word of God. Yeah, so he says that Fear and Hunger mode is easier, but he wouldn't go around calling it easy mode, that's for sure. It's not easy. Pretty big margin between Fear and Hunger 1's normal mode and the easy mode in Termina. And Termina is still in active development phase, so its modes are still of a wild card. Most likely Terror and Starvation will be dropping soon. If not in the next update, then the update after that. So we're going to be getting a harder difficulty mode in Termina very soon. Maybe this next update, maybe the one after. So I don't know if it needs it. My personal take is I don't know if it needs it, but I suppose something a little bit harder than normal mode, but still not as hard as Masso mode, I guess would be nice, right? Because Masso mode is just way over the top, isn't it? Right now in Termina, we've got easy, normal, and Masso. Terror and Starvation mode would be above normal mode, but below Masso. So it's basically a harder version of normal. So you wouldn't have the moon scorching effect. You wouldn't have the not being able to sleep. It would be the normal game, just a lot harder. And this one, I can't tell if it's a joke or not, because somebody suggested giving Needles extra guns in Masso mode. And Orange said Masso balance tweaks coming up. I don't know if he's being serious or not. It's hard to tell sometimes. But we might have some extra changes coming to Masso mode in the next update. We've got a little bit of lore stuff too. So that's all the, or long-term content stuff, right? So they've got a little bit of lore next. It's explicitly confirmed now that Dan is from the Fear and Hunger equivalent of Netherlands. Well, at least that's where his name comes from. Orange will sometimes clarify stuff. I imagine this is the sort of stuff he's talking about. Little background lore pieces of the characters that we're not going to find this out in Fear and Hunger 3, right? Because it's not going to be about the same characters. Just little background bits of information about these people, so we know a bit more about them, which is nice. We find out Dan's from Netherlands. I don't know what Netherlands is like in real life, but... And this one, I was part of this argument, right? Mal asked Orange, so we were having an argument over the item description in Termina was a grammar mistake or not. For the Sabbath weapon, so the Sabbath weapon is a weapon you can get in the church rafters. If you use the Venushka sigil in the basement, you can climb up and get this sword. It deals otherworldly damage, and it's not very good, but it's an okay way to get otherworldly damage if you're desperate for it. So the description reads, to counter the rising threats of the witch and vampire hunts of the 1700s, Vatican City developed this otherworldly sword to be used by the Penance Knights as their new main weapon. We were arguing whether it was intended to be used to defend against witch and vampire hunts or used for hunting witches and vampires. And so there was a bit of an argument because if it's used to defend against vampire hunts, it means there's vampires in the church. But if it's used for vampire hunts, it means the church is making weapons to hunt vampires. So it's completely different meaning, right? But Orange said that, yes, they were used against supposed vampires and witches. Whether or not those things actually existed is another question, but no, they were not in the church, which actually, it legitimately did change a bit of the lore discussions that we were having at the time. So I thought it was worth mentioning here. I may have been the first person to say it was a grammar mistake. Maybe. I was the first person to see somebody mention that. Okay, so that's sort of the lore little snippets, but so there's a bit of misc stuff here too. So somebody asked Orange, how do you feel about fan games? 0 monetization and full credits to you, of course. And he says, yes, would love to see fan games. Go nuts. He says, good luck if you're doing it though. It's intimidating to try and replicate all the features in the game, so my suggestion is to be a more focused experience. But he says that not an RPG like Termina, but just using the settings and characters, not the mechanics. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. I've heard some people try to make fan games every now and then, but those projects die immediately when they check the coding of the game. Most probably want to build their fan game on top of the existing engine, and it's inevitably a nightmare. And once people realize how much work goes into even one small new enemy battle, it's not exactly encouraging. Not to mention new fully playable characters. We did see some mods for the first game. I believe we saw one mod where you could play as the little girl, and I think there was one where you could play as Lagarde as well. Yeah, despite being an RPG Maker game and despite being, I suppose, fairly popular among a certain crowd, there wasn't as many mods as you'd expect. Yeah, and Orange talked a little bit about his writing style, which I thought was pretty interesting. Oh, right, he was talking about this. Let's watch this. This is what he was talking about in response to.
Good afternoon, mister. From what I understand, you're a newcomer to this town too, no? We just got a new mayor to the old town. I'm sure he's thrilled to start his business immediately by meeting the newcomers.
Did he pass me anymore? I hold the key. Good. Newcomer, isn't it peaceful here? I'm glad to see you're not a complete loony yet, unlike those others. You saw those people, didn't you?
Just awesome voice acting. I'll link that. I'll link that in the description of the video. So in response to that, somebody posted that and said, like, we need VAs. Listen to how cool this is. And Orange says, yeah, that's really cool. I don't think I'll be adding voice acting in games until I can afford some real good voice acting. Nothing breaks immersion as much as amateurish voice acting, which I 100% agree. I have legitimately dropped some games and not even played them because they have awful voice acting. I prefer no voice acting over bad voice acting. I could probably find a handful of good voice actors as it is, but nowhere close to covering the whole game. Won't touch AI generation despite it doing good work. I should really up my work methods before voice acting too. Can't be changing the script with every update if I have people voice those lines. That's another thing too, right? Like when you have to add all these different features, you sort of have to say, okay, well the script has to be finished like 2 months in advance so the voice actors actually have time to read it out, and then you've got to do all the processing of the files and put it into the game, and it adds a lot more work than just having someone speak through a mic. It would completely change the workflow, and I don't know if Orange can do that. he works off the cuff a lot, so as we find out in this next one, actually. Because somebody asked, "Hey Orange, I was wondering, when you sit down and write dialogue for your games, what's the process like?" And he says, "I do it on a whim. Most dialogue and text in the game is written on the spot. Like I put the character event in the game and just write whatever comes to mind. Of course, at that point, I've already established the personalities pretty well in my head, so the dialogue comes through on its own, really. Characters write themselves, if that makes sense. But yeah, there are cases where I write things down before putting text in the game. It's usually if I get a good idea or hear a good voice line in the TV show I want to rip off. So I guess it's not 100% done on the spot. Fear and Hunger writing is a bit all over the place, because it keeps it from being a bit too boring, but I'd like to attempt more focused writing at some point. And obviously this sort of style goes completely against having voice acting in the game. And I think for the most part, the writing is pretty good. I think he does a good job with all the characters and all their different voices, with a couple of exceptions. But they still all feel unique though, right? Like even the ones I dislike still feel unique. And lucky last, Miro has confirmed Dungeon Knights 2, and he has revealed a little bit of art about it. It's this fella. Can I zoom in? I think he said at one point it might be more of a game show type feel, but being Miro, it's hard to know if he's joking or not. Whatever's going to happen in Dungeon Knights 2, it's going to be insane. There's no ETA on Dungeon Knights 2. It could be next patch, it could be the patch after, it could be whenever. So, who knows? Who the hell knows? But the next update is going to be fucking massive. It's going to be way bigger than we thought. Not going to have new characters, but it's going to have heaps of new locations and new enemies, probably new items and new lore as well. And then the patch after that, the major patch, not bug fix patch, of course, but the major patch after that will most likely have Tanaka or Pav or both. And we're definitely getting Terror and Starvation mode soon. There's a lot of shit happening. We haven't had an update since the end of January, I think. January 31st was the last patch. And that one was basically just bug fixes. It was a week before we had version 1.8, which included running and a couple of like doppelganger stuff and some tweaks. But this next patch is going to be bigger than that, really. It's going to have extra zones and stuff, so it's going to be sick. So that's all the little interesting tidbits I could dig up from the Discord. I don't know how often these style videos are going to be, if you guys like it or not. It depends if you guys like it or not. It depends on how much Miro posts, really. So, whenever I think there's enough information on the Discord to make an interesting video, then, I suppose we'll get another one of these. But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. And, what's a good YouTube outro? I should know this by now. I'm a YouTuber, aren't I? Leave a comment saying what you're most excited for. There we go. Yeah, leave a comment down the bottom saying what you're most excited for. I am so keen for the new caves and the new ways of just moving around the city. Like the fishing village is just going to be sick. I'm not that excited for Terror and Starvation, but some people really like that feature. So, all more power to them, right? The other features in the game I'm really excited for. So I'm pretty keen for that. Yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.